It was a quiet morning at the small town school. The classroom smelled of chalk dust, and the old wooden benches creaked under the students who talked and laughed before the bell. In one corner of the room sat a girl who hardly spoke. She was always early, her books neatly stacked, her uniform clean but faded. She didn't have the latest bag or shiny shoes like the others. Most days she kept her eyes down, trying to blend into the background so no one would notice her. But somehow that only made her stand out more. She came from a poor family that lived near the edge of town. Her father had passed away a few years earlier, and her mother worked long hours cleaning houses. Every morning she would walk to school with her old bag hanging from one shoulder, holding her lunch in a small box wrapped with care. She rarely joined in conversations, and though she listened in class, her mind often wandered to music. Ever since she was little, she had loved the sound of the violin. She had once heard it playing on a neighbor's radio, and the sound had stayed with her. It wasn't like other instruments. It spoke in a language that touched her heart. Sometimes soft and sad, sometimes bright and full of life. It felt like it understood her feelings. But she never had a chance to learn. Lessons cost money, and her mother could barely afford the rent. Still, she found her own way. At night, when her homework was done and her mother had fallen asleep, she would take out an old violin that once belonged to her father. It was broken in places, with strings that didn't stay tuned, but it was all she had. She would hold it gently and try to remember the sounds she'd heard. Bit by bit, she learned, not from a teacher but by feeling, by listening, by making mistakes and trying again. At school, nobody knew about this part of her life. To everyone else, she was just the quiet girl who sat by the window. A few classmates sometimes made fun of her worn-out shoes or her simple lunch. They didn't mean real harm, but their laughter stung. She never argued. She never raised her voice. She just smiled softly and went back to her seat. One afternoon, while the music club was practicing in the hall, she stood outside listening. The door was slightly open, and she could see students holding shiny violins, guitars, and flutes. They laughed and played together. She wished just for a moment that she could be part of that group. She closed her eyes and imagined standing on that stage, her hands steady, the violin under her chin, the bow gliding across the strings. In her mind, she could almost hear the melody she would play. But when one of the students saw her standing there, he nudged his friend and whispered something. Soon a few of them were staring. One girl laughed and said loudly, "Hey, maybe she wants to play with us too." The others giggled. Embarrassed, she turned and walked away quickly. The sound of their laughter followed her down the hall. That night, she tried not to think about it. She told herself it didn't matter. People laughed because they didn't understand. Music was her secret world, and no one could take that away from her. A few days later, an announcement was made. There would be a school talent show at the end of the month. Students could perform anything they wanted: singing, dancing, magic tricks, poetry, music. Excitement filled the classrooms as everyone started talking about what they would do. The same group of students from the music club sat together, joking and planning their act. One of them mentioned the quiet girl again and smirked. Imagine if she went up there with a violin. That would be funny. At first it was just a joke, but then someone had an idea to write her name down on the performance list without telling her. "It'll be hilarious," one of them said. "She won't even know until her name gets called." They all agreed and laughed. To them it was just a harmless prank. They didn't think about how it might feel for her. The days passed, and she noticed the whispers but didn't understand why people were smiling at her in the halls. She thought maybe they were being friendly for once. She smiled back shyly, not realizing the truth. When the day of the talent show came, the school hall was decorated with colorful ribbons and balloons. Parents and teachers filled the seats while students waited excitedly backstage. The principal gave a short speech about courage and creativity, and the show began. One by one, students went up to perform. There were singers, dancers, even a comedy skit that made everyone laugh. The atmosphere was full of energy. Backstage, the quiet girl helped one of her classmates with props. She wasn't performing, at least that's what she thought. She clapped for everyone, happy to watch from the sidelines. Then suddenly she heard her name being announced through the microphone. For a moment she froze. She thought she must have misheard. But then she heard it again, clear and loud. Her name, followed by the words, "playing the violin." The students backstage turned to look at her. Some were whispering, trying not to laugh. Her hands began to tremble. She had never signed up. She didn't even have her violin with her. Her face turned pale as confusion washed over her. The teacher holding the clipboard asked kindly, "Do you have your instrument?" She shook her head slowly, unable to speak. The teacher frowned, thinking there must have been a mistake. But the audience was waiting, expecting something. A few students in the front row started giggling. Someone even called out, "Come on, let's hear it." Her heart was pounding. She realized what had happened. It was a prank. Her name had been put there to make fun of her. For a second, she wanted to run out of the hall, to disappear and never come back. But something stopped her. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was a voice inside her that said, "Don't let them win." The music teacher, noticing her distress, quietly offered her an old violin from the school's storage room. "You can use this one," he said gently, "if you want." She looked at the violin, her eyes glistening. It was worn but playable. Her hands shook as she took it. The hall was silent now, everyone waiting to see what she would do. She walked slowly to the stage, her legs feeling heavy. The lights felt too bright. She could see the faces in the crowd, some curious, some amused. For a moment, she stood there, frozen. Then she took a deep breath. She closed her eyes, just like she did every night when she played alone. She lifted the violin to her chin and touched the bow to the strings. The first sound was small and uncertain. A few people whispered, but she didn't stop. She focused harder, remembering the melodies she used to play in her little room. Slowly, the notes became clearer. Her fingers began to move more confidently, and the hall grew quiet. The laughter faded away. The sound that filled the air wasn't perfect, but it was full of feeling, pure, gentle, and real. Each note carried something from her heart: loneliness, love, hope. It was like she was telling her story without words. The people who had laughed before now sat in silence, watching her. Even the ones who had played the prank couldn't look away. Something in the music made their chests tighten. When she finished, she lowered the bow and opened her eyes. The hall stayed silent for a few seconds, then someone started clapping. It grew louder and louder until everyone was on their feet, cheering for her. She didn't know what to do. She just bowed her head slightly and walked off the stage, her heart still racing. That moment changed everything, but she didn't know it yet. What began as a cruel prank had turned into something unforgettable. And for the first time, she realized that even the smallest voice could be heard if it spoke from the heart. The next morning, the quiet girl walked to school as she always did, her old bag hanging by her side and her hair tied neatly. But something felt different. People were looking at her. Some smiled, others whispered. She wasn't sure what to make of it. She thought maybe they were still laughing about what happened the day before. Her heart sank a little. She didn't like attention, good or bad. She just wanted everything to go back to normal. When she reached the classroom, a few classmates greeted her softly. One girl said, "You played really well yesterday." The quiet girl blinked in surprise. "Thank you," she whispered. She sat down, not knowing what else to say. The group that had written her name on the list didn't meet her eyes. They sat in silence, whispering among themselves. For the first time, their laughter wasn't about her. During the first lesson, her mind kept drifting back to the moment she stood on that stage. The sound of the violin still echoed in her memory. She could remember the way the audience had gone silent, the way the air had changed. She had never felt anything like it before. It was as if, for a few minutes, the world had listened to her heart. But she didn't let the thought make her proud. She just felt thankful. She knew that moment came from something deep inside her, something her father had left behind. At lunch, she sat under the same old tree by the playground. Usually she ate alone, but today a few students joined her. One boy asked shyly, "Where did you learn to play like that?" She smiled faintly. "I learned by myself," she said. "My father used to play. I just tried to remember how he did it." They listened quietly. Her words were simple, but there was something special in the way she said them. A teacher passing by stopped to speak with her. "You have a real gift," the teacher said. "The principal wants to see you after school." The quiet girl felt nervous. She had never been called to the principal's office before. She wondered if she had done something wrong. When classes ended, she walked slowly to the office. Her heart pounded as she knocked on the door. The principal smiled warmly and asked her to come in. The music teacher was also there, holding the same old violin she had played the day before. "We just wanted to tell you how proud we are," the principal said kindly. "Your performance touched everyone. The girl lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. The principal continued. The school has a small fund for talented students. We'd like to offer you free violin lessons after school. Would you be interested? She looked up, her eyes wide. Really? She whispered. The teacher nodded. You have natural talent, he said. All you need is a little guidance. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. It felt like a dream. For the first time, someone believed in her. That evening, she ran home faster than ever. Her mother was folding clothes when she burst through the door. Mama, the school is giving me violin lessons, she said, her face glowing. Her mother froze for a second, then smiled with tears in her eyes. Your father would be so proud, she said softly. She reached out and hugged her daughter tight. You keep working hard, my child. This is just the beginning. The next day, after classes, she went to the music room. The teacher was waiting with a new violin that the school had provided. It wasn't fancy, but to her it was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. She held it carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. The teacher showed her how to hold the bow properly, how to tune the strings, how to control her breathing. She listened carefully, nodding at every word. Days turned into weeks, and she practiced every afternoon. The teacher was amazed at how quickly she learned. Every note she played carried emotion, as if she were telling a story each time. The other students sometimes peeked through the window, listening quietly. Some of them even joined the lessons, inspired by her dedication. The group who had played the prank on her began to feel the weight of guilt. One afternoon, as she packed her things, they approached her. The same boy who had written her name on the list stepped forward. Hey, he said quietly. She turned, unsure how to react. We wanted to say sorry, he continued. We shouldn't have done that. It was wrong. The others nodded behind him. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then she smiled gently. It's okay, she said. If that prank didn't happen, I wouldn't have played that day. Her words surprised them. Instead of anger, there was only kindness. They walked away feeling humbled. The following month, the school organized another event. This time, a cultural evening where students could perform for their families. The music teacher asked her if she would play again. She hesitated at first, but then agreed. I'll try, she said. The news spread quickly through the school. This time, everyone was looking forward to her performance. At home, she practiced every night. Her mother would sit nearby, mending clothes or preparing food, listening quietly. Sometimes she would hum along with the melody. It sounds like your father, her mother said one evening. The girl smiled, her eyes soft. I hope so, she whispered. The day of the event arrived. The school hall was full again, but this time the feeling was different. There was excitement, not mockery. Her classmates, her teachers, and even students from other grades waited eagerly for her turn. She stood backstage, clutching her violin. Her hands were cold, her heart beating fast, but she reminded herself how far she had come. When her name was called, the audience clapped. Not out of surprise, but out of respect. She walked to the center of the stage and bowed slightly. The lights shone on her face, and for a moment, she could almost see her father smiling in the crowd. She took a deep breath and began to play. The music flowed smoothly, soft at first, then rising into a melody full of warmth and life. It wasn't just notes. It was her story. The lonely days, the laughter she had endured, the dreams she had held on to. Every sound seemed to fill the hall with feeling. People listened in silence, their eyes glistening. When she finished, there was a long pause before the applause began. The sound was louder than ever before, echoing through the room. Her teacher clapped proudly, and even the principal wiped his eyes. She bowed again, her face glowing. She had played not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't. After the performance, people came to congratulate her. Parents she didn't know told her how moved they were. Some said they cried. Her classmates surrounded her, cheering. The group who once laughed at her now stood in front of her, clapping sincerely. She smiled, feeling something she had never felt before, belonging. That night, as she walked home with her mother, the streets felt brighter. The stars above seemed to twinkle more than usual. Her mother looked at her and said softly, You see, child, sometimes pain leads us to our true gift. The girl nodded, holding the violin close to her chest. When they reached home, she placed the instrument on the small table beside her father's old picture. Thank you, she whispered, looking at his smiling face in the photo. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. He heard you, she said. I know he did. In the quiet of that small house, surrounded by the sound of crickets and the cool night air, the girl finally felt peace. She didn't need applause or attention. What mattered was that her music had touched hearts just as it had touched hers. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of her journey. There were bigger stages waiting for her, but that night, in her small town, she had already become something greater than anyone had imagined. She had become a reminder that kindness and courage can turn even the cruelest prank into something beautiful. The weeks after the cultural evening were some of the happiest days of her life. People at school started treating her differently. The same classmates who used to whisper now smiled at her in the hallway. Teachers called her by name and praised her hard work. Even younger students looked up to her, asking if she could show them how to play. For the first time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. The girl who had once been invisible was now someone everyone knew, but she didn't let all the attention change her. Every morning, she still helped her mother before school. She still packed a simple lunch and wore the same old uniform. The only thing that had changed was the small spark of confidence in her eyes. The music teacher continued to train her after school. Every lesson was a new challenge. Sometimes her fingers hurt. Sometimes she grew tired, but she never complained. The teacher would often say, "You have something that can't be taught. You play from your heart." One afternoon, while she was practicing, the teacher told her something that made her heart skip a beat. "There's a regional music competition next month," he said. "It's a big event. Schools from all over the district will send their best students. I think you should represent our school." She froze for a moment. "Me?" she asked softly. "But I'm not ready." The teacher smiled. "You're more ready than you think. You just need to believe in yourself." That night, she told her mother about the competition. Her mother looked at her with both pride and worry. "It's a big opportunity," she said gently. "But don't let fear stop you. You have already faced worse." The girl nodded, though deep inside she felt nervous. Competing against trained students sounded impossible. But her mother's words gave her courage. The next few weeks were full of practice. After school, she spent hours in the music room, repeating the same notes again and again until they were perfect. Sometimes she stayed so late that the janitor had to remind her it was time to go home. Her teacher guided her carefully, helping her improve her posture, her control, her rhythm. "Remember," he told her one day, "it's not about being the best. It's about touching hearts. Play as if you're talking to someone who needs to hear you." She took those words to heart. Every evening at home, she played softly by the window. Her mother would sit nearby, sewing clothes for neighbors. The little house was filled with music and peace. The neighbors sometimes stopped to listen through the thin walls, smiling at the sound. Slowly, her confidence grew. The day of the competition arrived faster than she expected. The school provided a uniform for her, a white shirt and navy skirt with polished shoes. When she looked in the mirror that morning, she barely recognized herself. Her mother braided her hair neatly and kissed her forehead. "No matter what happens today," she said softly, "I'm already proud of you." The competition was held in a large auditorium in the city. It was her first time going that far from home. The school bus was filled with chatter and excitement. Some students were nervous, others couldn't stop laughing. She sat quietly by the window, holding her violin close to her chest. She looked out at the tall buildings and busy streets, feeling both amazed and small. When they arrived, she saw hundreds of students from other schools, all dressed neatly and carrying shiny instruments. Some practiced in corners, their music echoing down the hallways. For a moment, her confidence faded. These students looked professional. They had perfect instruments, confident smiles, and supportive friends. She felt like she didn't belong among them. Her violin, though loved, looked old and scratched compared to theirs. Her teacher noticed her hesitation and put a hand on her shoulder. "Remember why you play," he said. "Not to impress, but to express." She nodded slowly. Those words stayed in her mind. As the performances began, she sat backstage listening. Some performances were perfect, full of energy and skill. She admired them all. But as time passed, she began to notice something. Some players focused so hard on technique that their music felt empty. The notes were right, but the feeling wasn't there. That gave her hope. She didn't know all the rules of music, but she knew how to make people feel something. When her turn finally came, her hands were trembling. She walked to the stage slowly, feeling hundreds of eyes on her. The hall was large and quiet. She placed her violin under her chin and took a deep breath. The first few seconds were filled with fear, but then she remembered her father's face, her mother's voice, and the little room where it all began. She closed her eyes and started to play. The melody was soft at first, like a whisper. Each note carried warmth, like sunlight breaking through clouds. As she played, her fear melted away. The music became her voice. It told stories of struggle, love, loss, and hope. The sound grew richer, stronger. The audience sat still, listening closely. Some leaned forward as if afraid to miss a single note. When the last sound faded, there was a long, deep silence. Then came the applause. It started softly, then grew louder until the whole hall was filled with it. The girl bowed, her heart pounding. She didn't need to win. That moment alone was enough. After all the performances ended, the judges announced the results. She didn't come in first, but she received a special mention for outstanding emotional expression. Her school cheered loudly and her teacher smiled with pride. "You see," he said, "you didn't need to win first place to win hearts." On the way home, she sat by the window again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. She held her violin on her lap and thought about everything that had happened. It felt unreal. Just months ago, she had been the girl everyone laughed at. Now she had played on a stage where people listened to her in silence. When she reached home, her mother was waiting by the door. She ran into her arms and told her everything. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I knew you could do it," she said softly. "You just needed a chance." They sat together for a long time, not speaking, just feeling the quiet joy that filled their small home. The next day at school, students surrounded her again. But this time it wasn't just to praise her. Some asked for help learning the violin. Others said she inspired them to try new things. Even the pranksters who once made fun of her helped her carry her bag. The teachers announced her name during assembly and the whole school clapped for her. That evening, she went to the music room alone. The sun was setting outside and the golden light filled the room. She took her violin out and played softly just for herself. She thought about how strange life could be, how something cruel could turn into something beautiful. If that prank had never happened, she might still be sitting by the window dreaming quietly. But life had a way of surprising her. As she played, she realized something important. Music had not only changed her life, it had healed her. It had turned her pain into strength. It had given her a reason to keep moving forward. She smiled as she played, the sound filling the empty classroom. When she finished, she looked out the window at the fading sky. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she was no longer afraid. She knew now that even if the world laughed, she would keep playing. Because music wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the journey so far. The laughter, the fear, the applause, all of it had shaped her. She knew her story wasn't over. Somewhere out there, new stages waited. New people who would hear her music and understand her story without a single word. She closed her eyes with a quiet smile, the sound of invisible strings playing softly in her dreams. After the competition, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something inside the girl had changed forever. She no longer walked through the school halls with her head down. There was still the same calmness in her, but now it was joined by quiet confidence. She didn't speak much, yet when she smiled, it carried warmth that made people around her feel at ease. The music teacher continued to guide her every afternoon, helping her polish the small details of her playing. She listened carefully, eager to learn everything she could. One afternoon, after a long practice session, the teacher placed a newspaper on the table. Her name was printed there, mentioned among the top young performers from the regional competition. The short article talked about her emotional performance and how she had moved the audience. She stared at the paper for a long time, unable to believe it. It was the first time she had ever seen her name in print. The teacher smiled and said, "The world is starting to notice you." When she showed the newspaper to her mother that evening, her mother's eyes filled with tears. She placed the paper gently on the table as if it were something precious. "You've made me proud in ways I can't describe," she whispered. The girl hugged her mother tightly. "I just want to make you happy," she said softly. Her mother smiled. "You already have." As the days went by, her story spread around the town. People who once ignored her now stopped to congratulate her when they met her at the market. Some even asked if she would teach their children how to play. She never refused. She would show the small ones how to hold the bow, how to place their fingers on the strings and how to listen to the sound carefully. Watching their faces light up made her heart warm. She realized that music wasn't just about performing, it was about sharing. One morning while she was helping her mother at home, a letter arrived from the city's cultural center. It was an invitation to audition for a youth music program. The program offered free training and the chance to perform in front of professional musicians. Her heart began to race as she read the letter again and again. The teacher, upon seeing it, was overjoyed. "This is a big step," he said. "It could change your future." Though she felt nervous, she decided to go. The school supported her, arranging her travel and giving her a new violin case. The principal even gave a small speech during assembly, telling everyone how proud they were to have her represent their school. When she left for the city, the students waved from the gate, cheering her name. She smiled shyly, her heart full. The city was larger and louder than anything she had imagined. Tall buildings, busy streets, and people rushing everywhere. It all made her feel small again. The cultural center was a grand building with glass walls and a wide staircase. She stood outside for a few moments, clutching her violin case, then took a deep breath and walked in. Inside, the hall was filled with young musicians, each holding their instrument with confidence. Some talked and laughed together. Others practiced quietly. She found a corner and sat down, her hands shaking a little. When the auditions began, she listened to others play. The sound of violins, pianos, and cellos filled the air. Everyone seemed so skilled. For a moment, fear crept into her heart again. But then she remembered her teacher's words. "You play from your heart. That's what makes you special." When her turn came, she stepped onto the small stage. The judges looked at her kindly but expectantly. She bowed slightly and lifted her violin. The first note was soft, almost trembling, but she soon found her rhythm. The melody she chose was one she had written herself, a simple tune that told her story. It spoke of her childhood, her struggles, and the small joys that kept her going. By the time she finished, the room was completely silent. One of the judges had tears in her eyes. Another smiled and said softly, "Beautiful." A week later, she received the news. She had been accepted into the program. Her teacher cried when she told him, and her mother held her as if she were afraid to let go. "Your hard work brought you here," her mother said. "Your father would have been so proud." The training sessions at the cultural center began soon after. Every weekend, she traveled to the city to learn from professional musicians. It wasn't easy. The lessons were strict and the teachers expected perfection. There were moments when she doubted herself, when her fingers hurt and her confidence wavered. Some students whispered that she didn't belong there because she came from a small town, but she ignored them and kept practicing. She knew that her music didn't come from wealth, it came from love. Over time, the teachers began to notice her dedication. One of them said, "You have something rare. Your music has life." They started giving her solo parts during group performances. She practiced every day, even when she was tired. And slowly she improved. Months passed. And one day, the head of the program announced that the students would perform at the city auditorium, a large event that would be attended by musicians, critics, and the media. It was the biggest stage she had ever dreamed of. Her heart raced when she heard her name on the list of performers. When the day arrived, the city auditorium was filled with people. Lights glowed across the stage, and the sound of chatter filled the air. Backstage, she tightened her violin strings and took a deep breath. She remembered where she had started, from a broken instrument in a small home to this grand hall. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with calm steps. The audience quieted as she began to play. Her melody was soft and full of soul. It wasn't about showing skill. It was about telling her truth. Her music carried memories of her father, her mother's tired hands, the laughter that once hurt, and the courage that had kept her going. Each note reached deep into the hearts of those listening. As she played, she saw people in the crowd wiping tears from their eyes. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was thick with emotion. Then came the applause, loud, long, and heartfelt. She stood there overwhelmed, her eyes glistening. She had never felt so alive. After the performance, several people came to meet her. A reporter asked for her story. When she told them about her humble beginnings, they were deeply moved. Her photo appeared in the local newspaper the next morning, with the headline, "From Poverty to Passion." a girl whose music touched the city. When she returned home, her mother met her at the bus stop, tears of joy in her eyes. The neighbors gathered around to congratulate them. The small house was filled with laughter and warmth. That night, as they shared a simple meal, her mother looked at her and said, "You've shown the world that greatness doesn't come from where you start, but from how much heart you put into what you love." When she sat by the window holding her violin, she thought about everything that had happened. The prank, the laughter, the small stage at school, it had all led to this moment. She realized that every challenge she faced had pushed her forward. Every time she was doubted, she learned to believe in herself a little more. The moonlight streamed through the window, falling softly on her violin. She lifted it and played quietly, the melody floating through the night air. It was gentle and hopeful, like a promise. She knew her journey was still far from over, but she wasn't afraid. She had learned that dreams don't need permission to exist. They just need courage. And in that peaceful night, her music carried across the quiet town, reminding everyone who heard it that even the smallest voice could create the most beautiful sound when it came from the heart. After her performance at the city auditorium, things began to change more than she had ever expected. The music school offered her a permanent place in their advanced training program, and the local news started calling her the girl with the golden violin. At first, she didn't know how to react to all the attention. Reporters wanted interviews, people wanted her autograph, and some even came to her small town just to meet her. But even with all the new faces and flashing cameras, she remained humble, speaking softly and always thanking everyone who had supported her. Her teacher often reminded her, "Fame can be loud, but your heart should stay quiet." She kept those words close. Every day she practiced with the same focus she had from the beginning, never letting the excitement distract her. Her dream wasn't about being famous. It was about playing music that touched people's hearts. One afternoon, after a long rehearsal, she was walking home through the busy streets of the city. She stopped by a small music shop and looked at the violins displayed in the window. One of them reminded her of the broken one her father had once tried to fix. She stood there for a long time, lost in memory. The shop owner noticed her and came outside. "You play?" he asked kindly. She nodded. He smiled and said, "You have the eyes of someone who loves music deeply. Come in, I'll show you something." Inside, he took out an old violin from a case. The wood was worn but beautifully polished. "This belonged to my father," he said. "It has a warm sound, not loud but full of soul. It deserves someone who can bring it to life again." When she played a few notes on it, the room seemed to fill with magic. The sound was soft and deep, just like the man had said. He watched her silently and then said, "I think it found its voice again through you." She smiled and gently returned the instrument. "It's beautiful," she said softly. The man nodded and said, "So is your playing. Never lose that feeling." She thanked him and left, her heart filled with quiet joy. Encounters like these reminded her why she loved music. It connected people without needing words. Weeks later, she received a letter from the cultural center again. This time, it was an invitation to join an international youth orchestra that would tour different cities. Her mother couldn't believe it. "You're going to travel the world?" she asked, her voice trembling with pride. The girl nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "It's hard to believe, but yes." Preparations began immediately. The town once known for its simplicity was now buzzing with excitement. Neighbors came to wish her luck. The school held a small farewell gathering, and her teacher gave her a small wooden pendant shaped like a violin. "Keep this," he said. "It will remind you where you started." She held it close to her heart. When she left for her first international tour, it felt like stepping into another world. Airports, hotels, large concert halls, it was all new and overwhelming. But when she held her violin, everything felt familiar again. Music was her home, no matter where she went. The orchestra was filled with talented young musicians from all around the world. They spoke different languages, came from different places, but when they played together, it felt like one heartbeat. Their conductor, an elderly man with kind eyes, noticed her right away. "You play not only with skill," he said during one rehearsal, "but with truth. That is what makes music timeless." Their first performance took place in a grand theater in another country. The audience filled every seat and the lights shimmered across the stage. When she played her solo part, her mind flashed through all the moments that had brought her here. The laughter, the struggle, the tears, and the small victories. She played with every bit of her soul, and when the concert ended, the applause seemed to echo endlessly. Backstage, one of the organizers approached her. "Your performance was extraordinary," he said. "We'd like to feature you in a special solo concert next month." She could hardly believe it. The idea of performing alone, representing not just her country but her story, made her both nervous and excited. When she returned home between tours, she spent her days visiting her old school and helping children learn music. She didn't want anyone to feel like she once did, unseen or unimportant. She brought her violin and played for them, telling them that dreams could come true, even for someone from a small house in a quiet town. The children listened with wide eyes, inspired by her words and music. One day, while teaching, she noticed a shy little boy standing in the corner. He didn't speak much, but his eyes followed her every move. After class, she went up to him and asked if he wanted to try playing. He nodded slowly. His hands trembled as he held the violin, but when he played the first note, it was pure. She smiled and said, "You remind me of myself." That moment filled her with a deep sense of purpose. She realized that her success wasn't just about performing, it was about giving others hope. Music had saved her in ways words never could, and now it was her turn to pass that gift on. As the date of her solo concert approached, she practiced more than ever. Every night she played until her fingers hurt, perfecting each note. The concert was scheduled in one of the most beautiful theaters in the world. Musicians she had once admired would be in the audience. Her teacher couldn't travel that far, but he sent her a letter filled with encouragement. "Remember," he wrote, "you're not just playing a song, you're telling your story." The night of the concert finally came. The hall was silent as she stepped on stage. The soft glow of the lights made her violin shine like gold. She took a deep breath and began. The first notes filled the air, delicate and haunting. The melody told of her journey, from the dusty classroom where she was once made fun of to the shining stage where she now stood. The music grew stronger, rising like a wave of emotion. Each note carried the echo of her mother's prayers, her teacher's faith, and her own quiet strength. She played with her eyes closed, lost in the sound. When the final note faded, there was a moment of stillness. Then the crowd rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some even shouted her name. Tears welled up in her eyes as she bowed deeply. She had never imagined such a moment. After the concert, people came to congratulate her, and one of the directors from a prestigious music academy offered her a scholarship to study full-time. It was an opportunity that could secure her future. When she told her mother the news over the phone, her mother's voice broke with happiness. "You did it, my dear," she said. "Your father must be smiling from above." The girl cried silently, whispering, "I hope he is." The next few weeks were a blur of travel and new beginnings. She started preparing to move to the academy, knowing it would be a new chapter in her life. Yet she never forgot where she came from. Before leaving, she visited her school one last time. The classroom still looked the same, with old desks and faded posters. She placed her hand on the teacher's desk and smiled, remembering the day everything changed. Later, she walked to the old music room where she had played her first song during that prank. Dust floated in the air, and the old piano stood silently in the corner. She took out her violin and began to play softly. The melody flowed through the room, gentle and warm. It was like speaking to her past self, the scared, quiet girl who once thought she wasn't enough. She played until the last note faded, leaving behind only peace. Before leaving, she left a small note on the music stand. It read, "To the next person who picks up the violin, believe in yourself. The world listens when you play from the heart." Then she walked out, closing the door gently behind her. As she stepped into the sunlight outside, she felt a calm she hadn't known before. Her journey had been filled with pain, doubt, and struggle, but it had also been filled with kindness, hope, and love. And as long as she had her violin, she knew she would never be alone. Her story was far from over, but now she wasn't just a poor girl with a violin. She was a reminder that dreams, no matter how small they start, can one day fill the world with music. When she arrived at the music academy, everything felt new again. The tall buildings, the soundproof practice rooms, and the students walking around with instruments, it all felt like a dream. She was nervous but determined. Every morning she woke up early, practiced for hours, and attended classes. Her teachers quickly noticed her dedication. "You play with your soul," one of them said. "That can't be taught." Even though life at the academy was busy, she never forgot her mother back home. Every evening she called her and shared little details about her day, the pieces she was learning, the people she met, and the challenges she faced. Her mother always listened with pride, even when her voice carried the weariness of long days. "Just keep doing what you love," she would say. "That's all that matters." Her classmates came from wealthy families and had years of training behind them. At first, some of them looked at her quietly, unsure of how to take someone from such a simple background. But as soon as they heard her play, their attitude changed. They began to respect her, not because of where she came from, but because of what she carried in her music. One day, the Academy announced that they would host an annual showcase where students could perform their original compositions. The best piece would be recorded and shared with audiences across the country. The moment she heard about it, her heart skipped a beat. She had been working on a melody inspired by her childhood, a tune filled with longing and hope. It felt like the perfect time to share it. For weeks, she spent every spare moment refining her piece. She sat by her window late at night, her violin resting on her shoulder, letting her memories guide her fingers. The sound was soft and emotional, like the whisper of her past. Her teacher heard her practicing one evening and paused outside the room, listening quietly. When she finished, he walked in and said, "That song will stay in people's hearts. Don't change a thing." When the day of the showcase arrived, the hall was packed. The students performed one after another, each piece filled with skill and energy. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with calm steps. The lights were bright and the hall was silent. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were gentle, flowing like a story being told in whispers. Her melody carried the sounds of her small town, her mother's laughter, and the echo of the first time she held a violin. As the music grew, it spoke of the prank that had once humiliated her, the teacher who believed in her, and the journey that had shaped her. Every note carried emotion that words could never express. When she finished, the hall remained silent for a long moment. Then, as if waking from a dream, the audience began to applaud. The applause grew louder, and people stood to their feet, clapping with tears in their eyes. She bowed deeply, her heart full. That moment felt like the closing of a long chapter in her life. The next morning, her composition was the talk of the Academy. The recording was sent to music stations, and soon people from all over the country were listening to her song. Some said it made them cry. Others said it gave them hope. A famous composer even wrote to the Academy asking to meet her. When they finally met, he told her, "Your music reminds people what it means to feel. Keep playing that way." She couldn't believe how far she had come, from the girl who once stood on a school stage trembling with fear, to someone whose music touched strangers across the world. Yet even in her success, she stayed grounded. She visited her hometown every few months, always carrying her violin. Each time she returned, the people would gather to greet her. Children ran up to her asking questions, wanting to hear her play. One summer, she decided to organize a small concert in her town. She wanted to give back to the place where everything had begun. She wrote letters, gathered support, and even managed to get help from the cultural center. The concert was held in the school courtyard, the same place where the prank had once happened. But this time there was no laughter or mockery, only anticipation and respect. The evening of the concert was magical. The courtyard was decorated with lights, and the whole town showed up. Her mother sat in the front row, her eyes glistening. When she began to play, the air seemed to stand still. Her melody drifted through the night, wrapping everyone in its warmth. It wasn't just a performance, it was a homecoming. When the final note ended, the applause was so strong that she couldn't hold back her tears. After the concert, her old teacher came up to her, older now, but with the same kind eyes. "You've made us all proud," he said softly. She hugged him tightly and replied, "I couldn't have done it without you." As time went on, her career grew. She traveled to new countries, performed in grand halls, and worked with great musicians. But no matter how far she went, she never stopped playing for those who needed comfort. She visited hospitals, orphanages, and schools, using her music to bring smiles and peace to those who were struggling. It became her way of giving back. Years later, she returned to her hometown again, not as a performer, but as a mentor. She opened a small music school there, offering free lessons to children who couldn't afford them. The little building was simple, but it was filled with laughter and music every day. On the wall, she hung a photo of her first performance, as a reminder that every journey begins with courage. One afternoon, as she sat with her students, a little girl asked her, "Did people ever laugh at you when you played?" She smiled gently and said, "Yes, they did. But that's okay. Sometimes laughter is just the sound of people who don't understand you yet." The children listened closely, their eyes wide with admiration. "What matters," she continued, "is that you never stop believing in your song." That evening, after the students left, she sat alone with her violin. She looked around the small room, filled with instruments and memories. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the floor. She lifted her violin and began to play a soft tune, a mixture of joy and peace. It was a song of gratitude, one that told the story of her life without words. Her mother, now older and frailer, often sat by the window listening to her practice. "Your father would have been so proud," she would whisper. "He always said your hands were meant to create beauty." And the girl, now a woman, would smile and say, "I just hope I've made him proud too." As the years passed, her name became known in music circles around the world. Yet, in her heart, she was still that same quiet girl who had once stood trembling on a school stage. Her music carried her truth. It spoke of struggle, kindness, and the strength to rise above pain. People said that whenever she played, it felt like she was sharing a piece of her soul. One day, during an interview, a journalist asked her, "What was the turning point in your life?" She thought for a moment and replied, "It was the day someone told me to play the violin as a joke. They thought it would embarrass me, but instead it became the moment I found who I truly was." The journalist smiled. "And what would you tell young people who face the same kind of mockery or doubt?" She looked into the camera and said, "Don't let other people decide your worth. The world might laugh today, but one day they'll listen." That quote became famous. It was printed in magazines and shared across social media. But to her, it wasn't just words, it was the truth she had lived. Many years later, long after her concerts had filled cities and her music had inspired countless hearts, she returned once more to her hometown. The small streets, the old school, the familiar air, it all felt the same. She walked to the same spot where it had all begun, standing quietly by the old music room. It was empty now, but she could still feel the echoes of her first notes there. She took out her violin, now slightly worn but still full of life, and began to play one last song. It was the same melody she had played years ago during the prank, but this time, it sounded even more beautiful, richer, deeper, full of wisdom. The wind carried the tune through the open windows across the quiet town, reaching every corner like a gentle reminder. When she finished, she closed her eyes and smiled. She didn't need applause or recognition anymore. She had already received the greatest reward of all, the knowledge that she had turned pain into something beautiful, something that touched hearts and gave hope. As the sun dipped behind the hills, she whispered softly to herself, "It all began with a prank, but it ended with a purpose." And with that, she walked away, leaving behind a legacy that would live forever in every note of her music.